How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, December 21st, 2020, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to take you through the Elite performances from yesterday, the 15th Sunday of the 2020 NFL season, along with soccer that's been going on as well. And I'm just going to walk you through, and of course, I'll preview what's going on tonight, especially with football. So just starting off with the NFL, going through yesterday's games as we look through. And of course, after there was a Thursday game between the Chargers and the Raiders, and on Saturday, the Bills were able to beat the Broncos and the Packers were able to beat the Panthers, and I covered that in yesterday's episode. I'm just going to walk through, starting with the 1 o'clock games. Starting with Atlanta, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to come into town and beat the Atlanta Falcons 31-27 after originally being down 17-0 at the end of the first half. They scored 21 points in the third quarter to come back, and then eventually it would come down to a big touchdown from Tom Brady to Antonio Brown. A goated quarterback Tom Brady to elite wide receiver Antonio Brown to give the Tampa Bay Buccaneers yet another win, which would help them in the playoff picture. Looking at how the Atlanta Falcons fared, their elite starting quarterback Matt Ryan would complete 34 of his 49 passes, throwing for 356 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran for 16 yards on a carry, which would give him 372 total yards of offense for the day. Through the air, the leading receiver was Calvin Ridley, who had 163 yards and 10 receptions with a touchdown. Russell Gage had 68 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown, and Hayden Hurst had 21 yards on 4 receptions with a touchdown of his own. Elite running back Todd Gurley would get negative -1 yards on 1 carry, but he would also get 15 yards on 2 receptions, giving him 14 total yards on offense for the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Deion Jones was their leading tackler. He had 10 tackles on the day. He, Sherrod Neesman, and Grady Jarrett each finished with a sack on the day. Looking at how the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fared, their goated quarterback Tom Brady would complete 31 of his 45 passes, as he threw for 390 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, their leading rusher was Leonard Fournette, who had 49 yards on 14 carries with 2 touchdowns. He also had 16 yards through the air on 3 receptions to give him a total of 65 yards. Their leading receiver was their elite wide receiver Mike Evans, who had 110 yards on 6 receptions. Another one of their elite wide receivers, Antonio Brown, had 93 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown. Chris Godwin had 36 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown as well, as they all had pretty good games among themselves. On the defensive side of the ball, Devin White was able to finish with 12 total tackles on the day as he led the team. He had 3 sacks as well. He had all 3 sacks on the day for the team, as he showed up really big for this team in the end of the day. With this win, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are now 9-5, as they are now a game behind the NFC South leading New Orleans Saints, and they are, of course, still sitting in that playoff spot, or they're sitting in the 6th spot right now as the NFC currently stands, as they are 9-5 with the same record as the Rams, as they are 1 game ahead of the Arizona Cardinals. So that win there was very big for them. And then continuing on, looking at how the Falcons fared with this loss, they are now 4-10 in the NFC South, and of course they already haven't clinched a playoff spot, but of course this loss will probably give them a better chance of getting a good draft pick in this upcoming draft. Jumping to Miami, the Miami Dolphins hosted the New England Patriots and were able to beat them 22-12 in a game that went all the way down to the very end, where New England Patriots went into the 4th quarter leading 9-7, and then a couple of touchdown runs and Tua Tagovailoa would give the Miami Dolphins the win, and a very big one considering where they stand in the AFC playoff picture. For the New England Patriots, their elite starting quarterback Cam Newton would complete 17 of his 27 passes, throwing for 209 yards on the day. He also ran for 38 yards, which would give him a total of 247 yards of offense. Their leading rusher was Sony Michel, who had 74 yards on 10 carries. Jacoby Myers had 111 yards on 7 receptions as he led the team in receiving yards, as James White had 52 yards on 4 carries. No offensive touchdown of the day for the Patriots. All of their points came from field goals. On the defensive side of the ball, Terez Hall would lead the team in tackles. He had 13 of them on the day. The team would log 2 total sacks on the day as they came from Adrian Phillips and Adam Butler, and J.C. Jackson would log an interception to go along with his 4 tackles on the day. For the Miami Dolphins, their elite starting quarterback Tua Tagovailoa would complete 20 of his 26 passes for 145 yards. He also threw a pick, but on the ground he ran for 9 yards on 3 carries to give him 154 total yards of offense, along with 2 touchdowns on the day, and of course that interception being his only interception of the day. On the ground, Salvi and Ahmed would finish with 122 yards and 23 carries and a touchdown as he led the team in rushing. And Matt Breida had 86 yards on 12 carries. Through the air, their leading receiver was Durham Smythe, who had 40 yards on 5 receptions. And on the defensive side of the ball, Landon Roberts would lead the team in tackles. He had 9 of them, and he also recovered a fumble, which would be very big for the team. Also, on the defensive side of the ball, Jerome Bakers, Jack Sealer, and Emmanuel Ogba would record the 3 sacks of the game for the Miami Dolphins. And with this win, the Dolphins are now 9-5, as they currently sit 2 games behind the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East, with 2 games remaining, and they are now 3 games ahead of the New England Patriots. With this loss, I believe the New England Patriots are officially out of the AFC playoff race, but with this win, the Dolphins still sit at the 7th spot in the AFC wildcard, holding on to that spot for dear life, as they have the same record as the Baltimore Ravens, who are knocking at the door. But like I said, with this loss, the Patriots at 6-8 have been knocked out of contention. Jumping to Baltimore, speaking of the Ravens hosted the Jacksonville Jaguars and were able to beat them 40-14 as they kind of dominated this game from beginning to end. For the Jaguars, their starting quarterback Gardner Minshew would complete 22 of his 29 passes, throwing for 226 yards and 2 touchdowns. Through the air, their leading receiver was DJ Chark Jr., who had 53 yards on 4 receptions. James Robinson, in addition to having 35 yards on the ground, he had 18 yards through the air and a receiving touchdown, which would give him a total of 53 total yards of offense with that 1 touchdown. Chris Conley had 13 yards on his 1 reception and a touchdown. And on the defensive side of the ball, Joe Sherbert would lead the team in tackles as he had 12 of them. Jared Wilson and Miles Jack had 10 tackles each. Dwayne Smoot was able to log the only sacks of the game. And then continuing on, Josh Jones is able to record an interception to go along with his 2 tackles for the day. For the Baltimore Ravens, their starting quarterback, reigning 2019 NFL MVP Lamar Jackson, would complete 17 of his 22 passes, throwing for 243 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He also ran for 35 yards and an additional touchdown to give him a total of 278 yards with 4 touchdowns on the day. Additionally, J.K. Dobbins had 64 yards on 14 carries and a touchdown as he had 17 yards through the air to give him a total of 81 yards. Their leading receiver was Marquise Hollywood Brown as he had 98 yards on 6 receptions. Mark Andrews had 66 yards on 5 receptions, one of those receptions being a touchdown. And Dez Bryant would have 1 reception for 11 yards and a touchdown. And then Miles Boykin's only reception would be 4 yards, and that would be a touchdown as well. Continuing on, the Ravens would end up recovering 4 fumbles as a team, but some of them were on the offensive side. But on the defensive side of the ball, Marlon Humphrey would lead the team in tackles. He had 7 of them on the day. Patrick Queen had 6 tackles with a sack. Yannick Ngakoue would finish with 3 tackles on the day as he had 2 sacks. Derek Wolfe finished with a sack as he recovered a fumble. Matthew Judon had a sack. They had a total of 5 sacks as a team. And with this win, the Baltimore Ravens are now 9-5 as they are 3rd in the AFC North, 1 game behind the Cleveland Browns. And currently looking at the AFC playoff picture, they have the same record as the Dolphins, but because the Dolphins own the tiebreaker, the Dolphins are still sitting on that 7th spot as the Ravens are the 8th team right on the outside looking in currently. And with this loss, the Jaguars are now 1-13. And due to the recent win and due to the win from the Jets, the Jaguars are still in competition for right now the first pick of the 2021 NFL draft is up for grabs, and the Jaguars can most definitely do so, especially following this loss. Jumping to Indianapolis, the Colts were able to take on their division rivals, the Houston Texans, as they were fighting for a playoff spot. The Indianapolis Colts were able to take this one to the very end as they were able to win with less than 2 minutes left on a Zach Pascal touchdown pass from Phillip Rivers to give them their 10th win of the season. Looking at how the Houston Texans fared, their elite starting quarterback Deshaun Watson would complete 33 of his 41 passes, throwing for 373 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 25 yards on the ground, which gave him a total of 398 yards of total offense. I don't think he lost, and his only turnover coming from a fumble. Through the air, their leading receiver was David Johnson, who had 106 yards on 11 carries to go along with his 27 yards on the ground to give him 133 total yards of offense. Brandon Cooks had 59 yards on 6 receptions. Chad Hansen had 55 yards on 2 receptions, one of his receptions being a touchdown. And Kiki Kuti would finish with 53 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Tyrell Adams led the team in tackles as he had 11 of them. Zach Cunningham had 10 tackles. Charles Omenihu finished with the only sack of the game for the Texans, as their goated defensive end J.J. Watt would finish with only 1 tackle on the day. For the Indianapolis Colts, their starting quarterback Phillip Rivers would complete 22 of his 28 passes, throwing for 228 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Jonathan Taylor, who had 83 yards on 16 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, Zach Pascal was their leading receiver. He had 79 yards on 5 receptions and 2 touchdowns, both of the receiving touchdowns of the day for the Colts. And T.Y. Hilton finished with 71 yards and 4 receptions to help the Colts do what they needed to do. On the defensive side of the ball, Darius Leonard would lead the team with 12 tackles. As he had an amazing performance, as he is their elite linebacker. And then also Justin Houston was able to recover a fumble with his 1 tackle on the day. And then Bobby Okereke was able to recover a fumble for the Indianapolis Colts to go along with his 7 tackles. With this win, the Colts are now 10-4. They have the second best record in the AFC South. They have the same record as the Titans, but the Titans won the tiebreaker. So the Indianapolis Colts right now are sitting in the wild card right now. They're sitting in the 6th spot currently with this win. That was much needed, and with this loss, of course, the Texans are now 4-10 with the 3rd best record in that division, and they've already been eliminated from playoff contention. Continuing on, jumping out to Nashville, the Tennessee Titans were able to host the Detroit Lions and beat them 46-27, as the Titans were able to definitely run away with it in the 4th quarter. It was a 1-possession game as the Lions made it close to the field goal, but 3 touchdowns in the 4th quarter would basically seal it for the Tennessee Titans, especially because they needed this win. For the Detroit Lions, their starting quarterback Matthew Stafford would complete 22 of his 32 passes, throwing for 252 yards and a touchdown. On the ground, DeAndre Swift was their leading rusher. He had 67 yards on 15 carries and 2 touchdowns. Through the air, their leading receiver was Marvin Jones Jr., who had 112 yards and 10 carries and 10 receptions, and the only receiving touchdown of the day for the Lions. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Duron Harmon would lead the team with 10 total tackles as he had a pretty good game. Romeo Okwara would log the only sack of the day for the Detroit Lions, as they didn't get a lot going for them. For the Tennessee Titans, their starting quarterback Ryan Tannehill would complete 21 of his 27 passes, throwing for 273 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran for 21 yards and 2 additional touchdowns, so he would have 294 total yards of offense and 5 touchdowns to help the Titans get a very big win for them. On the ground, their elite running back Derrick Henry would finish with 147 yards on 24 carries and a touchdown. And through the air, he would have 5 yards, so Henry would have 152 yards in the day. Corey Davis had 110 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown. A.J. Brown had 44 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown, and Darrington Evans would finish with 27 yards and 2 receptions with a touchdown as well. On the defensive side of the ball, David Long Jr. would be their leading tackler, as he had 12 of them on the day. Jeffrey Simmons and Will Compton would end up recovering fumbles for the team, and the Titans as a team would not log a sack for the entire game, but Kevin Byard would end up with an interception on the day, as he finished with 10 tackles as well. With this win, the Tennessee Titans now have the best record in the AFC South, as they have the same record as the Indianapolis Colts, but of course they own the tiebreaker. So with this win, they are currently sitting with the 4th spot in the AFC at 10-4, and with this loss, the Detroit Lions are looking at the NFC. The Lions are officially out of playoff contention, as we look and see how those teams are looking right now, as they were eliminated today, actually. Jumping out to Dallas, the Dallas Cowboys were able to take on the San Francisco 49ers at home and beat them 41-33. This game came all the way down to the very end, but the Dallas Cowboys were able to run away with it at the very end. Very big game for them, very big performance, as the score was tied at the end of the 3rd quarter, as the Cowboys did what they needed to do to run away and at least keep their playoff hopes alive. For the 49ers, their starting quarterback Nick Mullins would complete 21 of his 36 passes, throwing for 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. He also ran for 7 yards to give him 226 total yards of offense. C.J. Beathard, their backup quarterback, would complete 5 of his 7 passes, throwing for 100 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Raheem Mostert, who had 68 yards on 14 carries, and then Jeff Wilson Jr. had 60 yards on 16 carries with a rushing touchdown. Through the air, Kendrick Bourne led the team in receiving yards. He had 86 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown, as Brandon Ayuk had 73 yards on 9 receptions, and Jordan Reed had 18 yards on 2 receptions with a touchdown of his own. On the defensive side of the ball, Eric Armstead led the team in tackles as he had 8 of them. He had 2 sacks. They were the only 2 sacks of the game for the San Francisco 49ers. And looking out to the Cowboys, their starting quarterback, Andy Dalton, would complete 19 of his 33 passes, throwing for 209 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, Tony Pollard had 69 yards on 12 carries and 2 touchdowns. Through the air, CeeDee Lamb led the team with 85 yards on 5 receptions. Michael Gallup had 26 yards on 3 receptions with a touchdown. And then Tony Pollard would have 63 yards through the air in addition to his 69 yards on the ground, which would give him a total of 132 yards of offense. Dalton Schultz also had 14 yards on 2 receptions through the air. And on the defensive side of the ball, Jalen Smith would lead the team in tackles as he had 10 of them on the day. Aldon Smith would recover a fumble as Aldon Smith that was kind of his big performance on the day, his big play. And then, of course, Dorrance Armstrong would recover a fumble as well. For the Cowboys, Jordan Lewis and DeMarcus Lawrence would record the only sacks of the day as Anthony Brown and Donovan Wilson would each log interceptions as well. With this win, the Dallas Cowboys are now sitting second in the NFC East, 1 game behind the Washington football team, and they have the same record as the New York Giants with 2 games left. So, of course, their playoff hopes are still alive with this win. And with this loss, the San Francisco 49ers are currently sitting at the bottom of the NFC West, and I believe they have been eliminated from NFC playoff contention as of right now with 2 games left to play. Continuing on, going out to DC, the Seattle Seahawks they visited the Washington football team and were able to beat them 20-15. As the Washington football team they got back into it in the fourth quarter, but the Seahawks were able to keep them at bay. Looking at how the Washington football team played, their starting quarterback, Dwayne Haskins, would complete 38 of his 55 passes, throwing for 295 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 picks. He also ran for 28 yards on the ground to give him 323 total yards of offense to go along with his 1 touchdown and his 2 turnovers. Their leading rusher was J.D. McKissic, who had 51 yards and 13 carries. Their leading receiver was Logan Thomas, who had 101 yards on 13 carries. J.D. McKissic, through the air, was able to get 56 yards on 9 receptions to give him 107 total yards of offense, and he had a receiving touchdown as well. Terry McLaurin had 77 yards on 7 receptions. And on the defensive side of the ball, Cameron Curl would lead the team with 8 tackles along with Kaleki Hudson. And then the Redskins were unable to get a single sack on all day, but Deron Payne would end up logging the only interception of the day as their elite young defensive end Chase Young would finish with 3 tackles on the day. For the Seattle Seahawks, their elite quarterback Russell Wilson would complete 18 of his 27 passes, throwing for 121 yards, 1 touchdown, and a pick. He also ran for 52 yards on the ground to give him 173 total yards of offense. And Chris Carson would finish with 63 yards on 15 carries. Carlos Hyde had 55 yards on 2 carries, and one of them being a touchdown. Big game for him. Through the air, their leading receiver was DK Metcalf, who had 43 yards on 5 receptions. Jacob Hollister had the only receiving touchdown of the day. He had 17 yards on 2 receptions, and one of them was a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Bobby Wagner, their elite linebacker, would lead the day with 13 tackles. Jamal Adams, their elite safety, would finish with 9 tackles and 1 sack, which would increase his lead and increase his record for the most sacks in a single season by a defensive back. Additionally, Alton Robinson, LJ Collier, and Carlos Dunlap would log the other 3 sacks of the day. DJ Reed Jr. would end up with an interception as he finished with 6 tackles on the day, and he also recovered a fumble. And Shaquille Griffin would finish with an interception as he had the interception on the Hail Mary attempt, and he had 4 tackles on the day as well. With this win, the Seattle Seahawks are now 10-4. They now have the best record in the NFC West, and I believe with this win, they might have clinched a spot for them in the playoffs with this win, and as they jumped up a couple spots in the NFC. And looking at how Washington fared, they are still sitting at the top of their division with a 6-8 record as they hold a tiebreaker as they lead the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants by a game. With 2 games left in their schedule, but of course this is a big win for Seattle as it saw them overtake Los Angeles for the best record in their division. So that's a big win. That's a big development there. Jumping out to Minneapolis, the Minnesota Vikings hosted the Chicago Bears as the Bears were able to beat them 33-27. And this game was able to come down to the end as the Bears were able to keep the Minnesota Vikings from completely coming back, and they most definitely earned this win. Looking at how the Vikings fared, their starting quarterback, Kirk Cousins, would complete 24 of his 35 passes, throwing for 271 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. He also ran for 25 yards, which would give him a total of 296 total yards of offense. And on the ground, their leading rusher was Dalvin Cook, who had 132 yards and 24 carries and a touchdown. Through the air, Justin Jefferson was their leading receiver. He had 104 yards on 8 receptions. Tyler Conklin had 57 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown. And Adam Thielen had 11 yards on 2 receptions, including a touchdown for the Vikings as well. On the defensive side of the ball, Eric Wilson led the team in tackles as he had 11 of them on the day. And the Vikings were on their only sack of the day came from Todd Davis. As he played well, their elite safety Harrison Smith had 3 tackles on the day as well. Cameron Dantzler finished with 3 tackles as he had an interception for the Minnesota Vikings. And looking at how the Bears fared, their starting quarterback, Mitch Trubisky, would complete 15 of his 21 passes, throwing for 202 yards with a touchdown and an interception. He also ran for 34 yards on the ground to give him 236 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher was David Montgomery, who had 146 yards on 32 carries and 2 touchdowns. Through the air, he had 16 yards to give him a total of 162 yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Allen Robinson II, who had 83 yards on 4 receptions, and Darnell Mooney, he finished with 49 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown, the only receiving touchdown of the day for the Bears. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Danny Trevathan would finish with 11 tackles on the day as he led the team. Bilal Nichols finished with a sack, same with Robert Quinn. Their elite defensive end / linebacker, Khalil Mack, would finish with 3 tackles and half a sack. He shared it with Brent Urban. And then Sherrick McManus would finish with an interception on the day. With this win, the Chicago Bears are now 7-7, as they now have the second best record in the NFC North, 4 games behind the Green Bay Packers. And currently looking at the NFC playoff picture, they are the first team in the bubble. They're the first team on the bubble outside of the wild card, as they are 1 game behind the 7th-seed Arizona Cardinals. And then with this loss, the Minnesota Vikings dropped to 9th in the NFC, as they are now 6-8. They are 1 game behind the Bears, 2 games behind the Arizona Cardinals currently as it stands. And that right now, that is how the NFC North is shaping out. And I believe depending on how the next couple weeks go, they may see themselves fall out of playoff contention altogether. And then looking out to Arizona, going out to Phoenix, the Cardinals hosted the Philadelphia Eagles and were able to beat them 33-26 to get a very big win at home. The score was tied at 26 going into the 4th quarter. It would come down to a DeAndre Hopkins 20-yard touchdown pass to keep the Arizona Cardinals playoff hopes alive, basically. Looking at how the Eagles fared, their starting quarterback Jalen Hurts would complete 24 of his 44 passes, throwing for 338 yards and 3 touchdowns. And he also ran for 63 yards, which would give him a total of 401 total yards of offense and 4 touchdowns. He had a pretty impressive game. Miles Sanders was their leading rusher. He had 64 yards on 17 carries, and then he also had 26 reception yards, which would give him a total of 90 yards. Through the air, Zach Ertz was their leading receiver. He had 69 yards on 2 receptions. Alshon Jeffrey had 63 yards on 2 receptions. Quez Watkins would have 40 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown. Greg Ward had 15 yards on 4 receptions, and 2 of his 4 receptions ended up being touchdowns for the Eagles. On the defensive side of the ball, Alex Singleton would end up leading the team in tackles. He had 11 of them, and he also recovered a fumble. Nikhil Roby-Coleman finished with 10 tackles. He had half a sack, and he recovered a fumble as well. Continuing on, the Philadelphia Eagles as a whole, they logged only 1 sack, as both Roby-Coleman and Jaquette would combine for the sack, and Marcus Epps would end up finishing with an interception on the day. Looking at how the Cardinals fared, their starting quarterback and reigning 2019 Offensive Rookie of the Year, Kyler Murray, would complete 27 of his 36 passes, throwing for 406 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He also ran for 29 yards and a touchdown, giving him 435 total yards of offense and 4 touchdowns. And of course, he had he also threw an interception as well. Their leading rusher was Chase Edmonds, who had 47 yards on 11 carries. Through the air, their leading receiver was their elite wide receiver, DeAndre Hopkins, who had 169 yards on 9 receptions and a touchdown. He also had a rushing yard. He had 1 carry for 1 yard to give him 170 total yards of offense. Continuing on, Larry Fitzgerald, their future Hall of Fame wide receiver, finished with 35 yards and 3 receptions and a touchdown of his own, as Chase Edmonds finished with 19 yards through the air and a touchdown to give him That gives him 66 total yards of offense from him. On the defensive side of the ball, Zach Allen would finish with 11 tackles and a sack as he led the entire team in sacks, or in tackles, I'm sorry. Patrick Peterson, their elite corner, would finish with 6 total tackles on the day. Dennis Gardick finished with 5 tackles, and he had 2 sacks on the day. The team logged a total of 6 sacks on the day as they were able to pick up their 8th win of the season, and with this win, they are holding on to that bottom spot in the NFC wild card by a game. They are 1 game ahead of the Bears, as they are 1 game behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Looking in the NFC West, they are 3rd in that division, as they are also 1 game behind the Los Angeles Rams, 2 games behind Seattle with 2 games left to go. So mathematically, I believe they're still in it. But as of right now, the Cardinals needed that win, and they were able to pull off a big win against Philadelphia at home. Jumping to Los Angeles, we jump to the biggest upset probably of the season, as the New York Jets won their very first game of the season against the Rams, who right now are still currently sitting in the NFC playoff picture. This game will come down to the end as the Rams brought it back, but it simply wouldn't be enough as the Jets got a big lead early on that the Rams were just unable to, they were able to come back on and capitalize on. For the Los Angeles Rams, their starting quarterback Jared Goff would complete 22 of his 34 passes, throwing for 209 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Their leading rusher was Cam Akers, who had 63 yards on 15 carries, and Robert Woods had 1 carry of 40 yards. In addition to his 56 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown, they give him 96 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Tyler Higbee, who had 67 yards on 4 receptions, and though as Higbee and Woods had the only 2 receiving touchdowns of the day for the Rams. Their leading tackler was Troy Reeder, who had 11 of them on the day. Samson Ebukam would finish with 4 tackles and a sack. And their goated defensive tackle, Aaron Donald, would finish with 3 tackles, 1 of them for loss. Looking at how the Jets fared, their starting quarterback, Sam Darnold, would complete 22 of his 31 passes. As he went back home, he went to USC, so of course, that was a big win for him. He threw for 207 yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 18 yards to give him a total of 225 total yards of offense. Frank Gore, the future Hall of Fame running back, was their leader on the team in rushing yards. He had 59 yards and 23 carries and a touchdown. Their leading receiver was Jamison Crowder out of Duke, who had 66 yards on 6 receptions. Ty Johnson had the only receiving touchdown. He had 39 yards on 6 receptions, and like I said, he had the only receiving touchdown of the day. On the defensive side of the ball, Neville Hewitt had 10 total tackles as he led the entire Jets team, and the Jets were able to log 3 total tackles sacks on the day, one of them coming from Quinnen Williams, their most recent top pick overall. So that was a big win for the New York Jets. And also Bryce Hall was able to log an interception to go along with his 3 passes. With this win, the Jets are now 1-13. That was their first win of the season. They, of course, sit at the bottom of the AFC East. And right now, the number 1 pick is going to be a toss-up between them and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think it'll go to the Jets probably, but we'll see how that goes. And with this loss, the Los Angeles Rams are sitting second in the NFC West as they dropped from being the division leaders to being the top seed of the wild card with a 9-5 record. They are currently tied with the Buccaneers for the best record in the wild card. They are 1 game ahead of the Arizona Cardinals, so I believe. And then also they are 2 games ahead of the Bears, so a win in the next game can secure a playoff spot in playoff seeding for the Los Angeles Rams. Jumping out to New Orleans, the Saints hosted the defending champs, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Chiefs were able to beat the Saints 32-29 in Drew Brees' first game back after being diagnosed with a collapsed lung. This will come down to the end as the Chiefs kind of kept it at arm's length. The Saints were able to get a touchdown with 2 minutes left, but the Chiefs were able to keep the Saints from fully coming back and winning this game. For the New Orleans Saints, their goated quarterback Drew Brees would complete 15 of his 34 passes, throwing for 234 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. Their leading rusher was Alvin Kamara, who had 54 yards and 11 carries. He also had 40 yards through the air with a receiving touchdown, as he had 94 all-purpose yards, with his reception touchdown being the only touchdown he had on the game. Their leading receiver was Emmanuel Sanders, who had 76 yards and 4 receptions. Lil Jordan Humphrey had 29 yards and 2 receptions and a touchdown, and Latavius Murray, in addition to his 3 rushing yards, he had 26 yards on 2 receptions and a touchdown for the New Orleans Saints. On the defensive side of the ball, Demario Davis led the team with 15 total tackles. Malcolm Jenkins had 12 of them. Quan Alexander was able to recover a fumble as Quan Alexander was able to get 6 tackles for the day. Trey Hendrickson finished with 2 tackles of the day as he had 2 sacks as he's out here pushing for the NFL sack leader. And then Carl Granderson had the other sack of the day for the team. For the Kansas City Chiefs, they're the reigning Super Bowl MVP. Elite quarterback Patrick Mahomes completed 26 of his 47 pass attempts, throwing for 254 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran for 37 yards, which would give him a total of 291 yards of offense. Clyde Edwards-Helaire would lead the team in rushing as he had 79 yards on 14 receptions, and he had 4 receiving yards on the day to give him 83 yards. Le'Veon Bell had 62 yards on 15 carries and a touchdown as he had 14 yards through the air, 76 total yards from him in addition to his rushing touchdown. Their leading receiver was their elite tight end Travis Kelce, who had 68 yards on 8 receptions and a touchdown. Sammy Watkins had 60 yards on 4 receptions, and their elite wide receiver Tyreek Hill had 53 yards on 6 receptions and a touchdown. And then Mecole Hardman would then have 22 yards and 3 receptions and a touchdown for the team. On the defensive side of the ball, Ben Niemann would lead the team in tackles as he had 8 of them. L'Jarius Sneed would log the only sack of the day for the Kansas City Chiefs as he also logged an interception to help the Chiefs get a very big win against the New Orleans Saints. With this win, the Chiefs are now 13-1. They sit atop the AFC West by about 6 games with 2 games left, and they currently sit at the very top of the division with a 13-1 record. And I guess they're gonna look to see how the Pittsburgh Steelers game pans out to see whether they clinch the conference or not. But it was a very big win for them. For the New Orleans Saints, they are 10-4. They are currently sitting atop the NFC South by a game over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then in looking at the NFC playoff picture, even though they've already clinched a playoff spot, they have now dropped to second place in the NFC below the Green Bay Packers as the Packers were able to surpass them as they were able to get a big win earlier this week. And then they have the same record as the Seattle Seahawks, so both of them are playing to see who gets home field advantage between those two teams. Jumping out, and then last but not least, going to New York, going to MetLife Stadium, the New York Giants faced off at home against the Cleveland Browns, where the Browns were able to get a 20-6 victory to get their 10th win of the season. For the New York Giants, their starting quarterback Colt McCoy would complete 19 of his 31 passes, throwing for 221 yards on the day. Their leading rusher was Alfred Morris with 39 yards on 7 carries, and their leading receiver was Darius Slayton with 74 yards on 4 receptions. Sherling Shepard at 51 yards on 4 receptions on the day. And on the defensive side of the ball, Blake Martinez would lead the team in tackles as he had 10 of them on the day. Dexter Lawrence out of Clemson would finish with 6 tackles as he logged a sack, the only sack of the day for the Giants. Looking at how the Browns fared, their starting quarterback Baker Mayfield would complete 27 of his 32 passes, throwing for 297 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 11 yards on the ground to give him 308 yards of offense. Nick Chubb led the way on the ground with 50 yards on 15 carries and a touchdown, in addition to his 16 yards through the air. Rashard Higgins was their leading receiver, who had 76 yards on 4 receptions, as Jarvis Landry finished with 61 yards on 7 receptions and a touchdown. Austin Hooper also finished with 41 yards on 5 receptions and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Carl Joseph would lead the team in tackles as he had 10 of them. Myles Garrett, their elite defensive end, would finish with 4 tackles on the day and half a sack as he shared it with Larry Ogunjobi, as they both combined for the only sack of the day for the Cleveland Browns. With this win, the Browns are now 10-4. They have the second best record in the AFC North, and depending on if the Pittsburgh Steelers lose, the Cleveland Browns could win that division. And currently looking at the AFC playoff picture, the Browns are sitting 5th, and they're sitting 5th in the wild card. They're sitting top of the wild card as they have the same record as the Indianapolis Colts, but of course they own the tiebreaker over the Colts, and the win against the Giants is a very big one considering they're fighting for their playoff lives. And then the New York Giants, with this loss, they now drop to 5-9. They are 3rd in the NFC East as they are tied with the Cowboys, but they are 1 game behind the NFC East leading Washington football team at 6-8. But as of right now, the Giants are still in it as well as the Cowboys and the Eagles right now. That's what the NFL is currently looking like right now. Looking forward to tonight's matchup. It'll be between the 11-2 Pittsburgh Steelers and the 10-1 Cincinnati Bengals. A win could prove very big for the Steelers, as the Steelers are still competing with the Kansas City Chiefs for the best spot in the AFC, which would guarantee them, because of the playoffs had extended to 7 per conference, where the Steelers are still competing for a first round bye in the playoffs. With that said, that's everything that's going on with the NFL, and I'll get back to you following those games. But jumping out to soccer, because there have, of course, been soccer matches for today that, of course, that are very important as to how a lot of these leagues are shaking up how they're shaping up right now. But looking through what's been going on, first starting with the Premier League, Leicester City was able to beat Tottenham Hotspur 2-0, as Jamie Vardy's goal, along with the own goal from Tottenham, would see them fall a little bit further down the table. Leicester City is now second in the Premier League, as they're 4 points from the top, and then Tottenham Hotspur drops to fifth in the table, as they are now 6 points from the top, as it's very close, but Leicester City is sitting at the top. Or Leicester City is getting closer and closer to Liverpool, as they are 4 points from the top. I don't know if I said that earlier. Manchester United was able to beat Leeds United 6-2. McTominay would end up scoring at the second and third goals. He was the first Premier League player ever to score 2 goals in the first 3 minutes of the game. Bruno Fernandes would score 2 goals, one of them coming off penalty kicks. And of course, this one would be big for Manchester United, as they now jump to third in the Premier League. They are fifth from the they are 5 points from the top, as they have one less game played than Liverpool and Leicester City. So a win, a win in the near future can see them jump to second in the Premier League table, which would be very important for them. Looking in the continuing on, jumping to Serie A in Italy, Inter Milan was able to beat Spezia 2-1, as Achraf Hakimi was able to score in the 51st minute, and Romelu Lukaku's penalty kick in the 71st minute would put Inter up 2-0. But then an extra time goal from Spezia, it would be good, but it just wouldn't be enough. With the 2 points, they were able to get a very big win, as they are now second in Serie A to AC Milan, who ended up being Sassuolo 2-1. As both of their first half goals were just enough to get them to squeak by and keep the number 1 spot. So of course that was a very big win for them, as you see AC Milan and Inter Milan sharing the top of Serie A. Also, Lazio was able to beat Napoli, as Ciro Immobile was able to score yet another goal for this side, as Lazio is trying to build up their team, of course, to prepare themselves for Bayern Munich and Champions League. In La Liga, Real Madrid was able to beat Eibar 3-1, as Benzema, Modric, and Vasquez would combine to get them 3 points in the game, and of course 3 points in the table. With this win, Real Madrid is second in La Liga to Atletico Madrid, as both teams are tied at the top, but Atletico has 2 less matches played. So of course, Atletico Madrid, when they play the same amount of games as Real Madrid, they could see themselves jump a little bit higher. But Real Madrid is seeing themselves jump right back into this table, especially following they're slightly bumpy start, but they're most definitely getting back into it. And then going to Ligue 1, PSG would end up drawing with Lille, as neither team was able to score a goal. And looking out into Ligue 1, PSG is now dropped to third in the table, as they are now 1 point behind Lille and Lyon, as they missed their chance to overtake both those two teams and take the best spot in Ligue 1. But it's very interesting, and that's what's going on with soccer. And then really quickly jumping out to college basketball to show you what's going on with that. Last but not least, just taking you through the ranked opponents, just to show you exactly how this season is going, especially with a lot of the games being postponed due to COVID. Starting off at the top, fourth ranked Michigan State picked up their first loss, as they lost to Northwestern 79-65. Boo Buie would finish with 30 points, as he led them to their fourth win of the season. They're now 4-1, 1-0 in the Big Ten. Michigan State is now 6-1, and they're 0-1 in the Big Ten. Sixth ranked Houston was able to be unranked Alcorn State 88-55 behind Quentin Grimes' 27 points and 10 rebounds. In his move from Kansas, he's trying to start a whole new career in Houston. He's doing a really good job out there. Ninth ranked Creighton was able to beat unranked UConn in overtime 76-74, as Christian Bishop led the way with 19 points. For UConn, James Bouknight would finish with 40 points, but it simply wouldn't be enough. Creighton is now 6-2. They're 2-1 in the Big East. UConn is now 3-1, as they're now 0-1 in the Big East. 11th ranked Texas hosted unranked Oklahoma State and beat them 77-74. Greg Brown led the way with 24 points, 14 rebounds, and 3 blocks as Cade Cunningham, the future first-round pick in the draft, finished with 25 points. It just wasn't enough. Oklahoma State starting out 0-2 in the Big 12 as they're now 6-2, and Texas is now 7-1 as they're now 1-0 in the Big 12. 19th and last but not least, 19th ranked Rutgers remains undefeated after beating 13th ranked Illinois 91-88 to go 2-0 in the Big Ten. Ron Harper Jr. finished with 28 points and 9 rebounds. That was a very big win for Rutgers, and that's what's going on with college basketball. And once again, that is what's been going on. That's what happened yesterday on Sunday, December 20th. Once again, today is Monday, December 21st, 2020. Out here in this quarantine, I'm James Sims. I want to thank you once again for listening to all 40 minutes of this piece. And once again, I hope all is well, and I'll get back to you following this last game of football, in addition to a playoff picture and an updated stats leaders and an updated individual stats leaderboard of the season. With that said, once again, I hope all is well. I hope you enjoy your Monday, and peace out. I'll catch you tomorrow.